Hello everyone. So this video is going to cover your lecture for this week since the class was canceled. It's going to be on your discussion section. That is going to be one section that you will be writing next. So the formatting of everything that I'm going to say here, it's going to be so redundant and you're going to hear them multiple times. So if you really listen well, you should have no problem writing a great discussion. So the formatting of your discussion, first of all, it's going to come right after the results section. There's no space. You don't go to a new page or anything. And the word discussion needs to be centered, bolded, and only the first letter of it is capitalized. So here's an example that you see that the last section of this paper is was their results, which we don't have. And then discussion starts right after. The word discussion is centered, only the D is capitalized and it's bolded. So the contents, this is just bullet points, and we're going to go into details about each of those. So generally, you want to restate the problem in hand, and then interpret your results again. Connect your findings back to literature. Interpret theoretical implications, and evaluate limitations of the study, and then have a conclusion of the study. Here's the example of how the discussion in this example paper started. So here in this example, they had two experiments. We only had one experiment, so they're talking about there are two experiments. In our case, it will be one. And then after that starts on interpreting the results, and we will go into details on how that needs to be done. So we're stating the problem under investigation. So again, we see that we're going to look at the Stroop effect and the cognitive mechanisms under the Stroop effect and the effects that we see that were facilitation, automaticity, and interference. And so you want to restate your hypothesis. If you remember, for your introduction, I have looked at some of them, not all yet. But for your introduction, I said that you could have 2 or 3 hypotheses. 3 would be better, but you could only have 2. So you talk about interference, that because of interference, you expect what condition to be completed slower than what condition. For interference, it was the fact that the incongruent counting would be slower than the neutral counting. And then the next paragraph, you want to talk about facilitation. Where did we see facilitation is where we saw that congruent counting is faster than neutral counting. And if you did have a third hypothesis, automaticity of naming versus counting, which one was faster? As we saw in our results and in the previous literature, it's known that counting is slower than naming. So when you see numbers, your brain wants to read the number than to count the number of the digits. So because of that, when you named the numbers, it was faster than when you counted the plus signs. Those were your 2 neutrals that you would compare when you talk about automaticity. So you talk about for each of these, which 2 tasks are we comparing? The reaction time of the what to task for the first, second, and third one that I just mentioned, and what part of results did we state those in. So again, this slide is kind of the repeat of the last one. What it has in addition is that, as you see, after you talk about interference, facilitation, automaticity, and you say because of that phenomenon, we expected this condition to be slower or faster than that condition. And then you see it asks, was it? That means you want to, when you talk about each of those, you want to say that whether or not your findings supported your hypothesis. And as we talked about in the beginning, what we did hypothesize was exactly what we can see in these numbers. Again, the numbers will not go in your discussion, but you need to know them and see them to be able to discuss them. So again, after in each of those sections, you want to at the end say whether or not your findings supported what we hypothesized at first in our introduction. So this is the mean reaction times is what you need to look at. So how long it took people to do each of these 4 conditions. So as you can see, the mean reaction time for neutral numeral naming is approximately 13 seconds. For congruent counting, 17 seconds. For neutral figure counting was 19 seconds, and for incongruent counting is 22.65, which is exactly what we hypothesized, that incongruent condition is going to be the slowest, slower than neutral counting, and congruent counting is going to be faster than neutral counting. And if we talk about automaticity, it goes back to the first one, that reading numbers is faster, would be faster and more automatic than counting them. So then you want to restate your results again without mentioning any numbers. You put the numbers in the results where you don't have that section in your paper, but you will have a quiz on it. So you speak only in pure English, no numbers. You just can say what was faster, slower, significantly faster, better, equal, whatever, but you don't put numbers in the discussion at all. And so you want to state whether or not your results supported your hypothesis, that in this case ours did. We found what we predicted we will find. And one important thing is that when you do research, you never want to use the word prove, because none of these studies really prove things. I mean, if you look at the literature, scientists do something and then some other people replicate it, improve things and change things and find different results. So you always want to use words like our findings suggest that, or support, or found evidence for, things like that, but never say prove. So again, this is just a repeat of what we had, but again, in addition, it has, so you talk about interference, you say because of interference, this is what we predicted, and then you say whether or not what we found supported that. And then you want to add, how does this compare to results of other experiments? So for your discussion, you need 2 new references, and you want to use some of the ones, I would say 2 or 3 of the ones that you used in your introduction. You want to refer back to those and also add 2 new ones that you haven't yet used in the paper. It doesn't matter if you want to say findings of this study, like this study found the same things as we did, or they found something different. Either way, you can use it, and we will talk about how in either of the ways you can, how you should talk about it. But you do want to then refer to some previous literature and compare it to your findings. So same with facilitation and the other one. So interpreting notable findings, like important things in what we find. Why is it important? What does it talk about? The rationale, all that. So why was incongruent condition slowest? You want to talk about what cognitive mechanisms, what happened that made that be slower than neutral counting condition. Yeah, you want to find the possible explanations for why you saw what you saw. Again, about neutral. So you want to find an explanation for each of these. Why neutral counting was slower than neutral naming. That has to do with automaticity. The incongruent has to do with the interference, and the congruent has to do with facilitation. So let's say it's not the case for us for this specific paper, but because it's not the only paper you're going to be writing, hopefully, you want to know what happens if your findings didn't support what you hypothesized. That's totally fine. That's why we do research, to see what we think and what we predict is true or not. It's going to happen or not. So you want to talk about possible reasons why it didn't happen. And you might want to look in the literature and see people that found the opposite of what you found, and by reading those, add some possible explanations and reasons why you didn't get what you thought you would get. So in that case, you would want to reevaluate the underlying mechanisms and see where you might have been wrong, what might have interfered with what you thought will happen, and why did it not happen possibly. So like I said, then you want to connect your finding. After doing all that, you want to connect your finding back to the literature. You want to go back and cite the studies that you talked about in your introduction. You can do 2 or 3 of these 3, Stroop, Heinzman, and Windus, or however. And then compare their results with yours. So you want to look for things that are in common between their study and the tasks, the findings, and everything, and talk about it. Relate the two. If they agree or disagree, either way, you can relate it back to some previous literature. Some of the ones in your introduction, and you need 2 that are not in your introduction, at least 2. But obviously you can have more. So you always cite all the information wherever unless something is common knowledge, unless something is something that everybody knows, stating obvious, you don't need to cite. But everything else that you get from a paper, from a book, from wherever you got it, you need to cite. And plagiarism is very, very, very important. I have already emphasized that a lot. So yeah, don't summarize other people's work without saying whose work it was. And for APA, you need both in-text citation, and that we have already talked about how it's done. And also you need a citation page at the end. That is going to be our lecture next week. So don't use quotes. Quotes in discussion is a no-no. In general, you don't use quotes unless it's really, really something for some reason necessary. Then you want to talk about, after all that, you want to talk about the limitations of your study. So what are some of the things that could have been better or limited you, or maybe made your results not exact, made your study less powerful? The way the task was done, the lists of numbers and signs that we had, the confounds, and we will talk about some examples of those so you can more easily think of more things to say when it comes to limitations. And then how the experiment can be modified to get rid of those and make it better. Okay, it says, it's talking about counterbalancing here. I'm sure maybe in your lectures section of your class you already know what it is. Maybe you've been over it, but it's sometimes the order that things are done can have an effect on a study, or the gender of the participants can have an effect on the study. So, for example, in our example, we had 4 tasks, and because this was one of our limitations, that you all, because we're doing it online, we're doing it at the same time, everybody did them in the same order, and that may cause some like practice effect, and maybe doing the first one, not specifically in this, but in a lot of studies, maybe doing the first one can have an effect of how you do the second one. So the right way to do this was to split the participants in four different groups, and have the first one, for example, do 1, 2, 3, 4, the second one do 3, 2, 4, 1, the third one, and so on and so forth. You get my point. So not everybody doing it in the same order. That's counterbalancing. Or for example, if like we were doing a study that some people had to do 6 blocks of remembering something that they've been shown, and 6 blocks of forgetting something. And then so we made sure that every other person, we switched. If remember was first, we put for this person, for the next person, we put forget first and remember second. So things like that are known as counterbalancing. That sometimes help your study be more reliable. So how can these limitations be modified and fixed? You want to talk about not only what was not perfect, you want to talk about what are some ways that we can improve it. And then at the end, you want to have a conclusion paragraph. Remember I said the quickest way to know what a study is to read the abstract. Now, and then the second quickest is to read the discussion. Now I take that back. The quickest is to read the summary section of the discussion, which is like usually the last or the one before last paragraph. That just wraps everything up, and you restate very, very, very summarized what you did and why you did it and what you found in one short paragraph, like a summary that you want to. That's like the takeaway of the whole thing, that if somebody wants to just see what you found, they can look at that paragraph and get a good idea of everything. So for your paper specifically, these are all repeats kind of, but a little more specific. So for each of the hypotheses, the 2 or 3, depending on whether you did 2 or 3, you restate the prediction, illustrate results for that specific prediction, and then you interpret your results. Did they match the prediction? And what, if yes, what does it say about the phenomenon, the underlying mechanisms? And how do the results compare to findings from previous literature? Again, different, same, how? And then you want to talk about some of the study limitation and things that can be done differently in the future research. And then there's a general conclusion again, like I just said. That is a short, very short paragraph summarizing the whole thing, the whole discussion. Yeah, you need 2 additional articles. Already talked about that. So here's again a little slide that tells you. So the first paragraph, you talk about this condition, and second paragraph about the other one, third about the other one, and then for each of them, you need to restate the prediction. Did our results supported? No, what did we find? Did that support our prediction or hypothesis? And then relate to previous finding. So you do all of these for all the 3: facilitation, automaticity, and interference. And then on the next paragraph, you talk about limitations and how the study can be improved in the future, or the other cool things that you can look at now, now that you found this. And the last one is going to be the conclusion. So this is exactly talking about what we just saw in the last slide. Your paragraphs need to be by concept. You don't want to just have everything mixed up. When you talk about facilitation, just talk about facilitation. What tasks showed us facilitation, and what previous literature you're connecting it to, everything about this concept together, everything about the next concept together, and so on. And the order doesn't matter. You can talk about whichever you want, first, second, third. But yeah, all of those need to be in there somehow. Yeah, as I said before, you don't want to talk about the stats in discussion. That goes in the result. Or sometimes methods, some of it, depending on the nature of the study. But so don't talk about the statistics in your discussion. Yeah. So here are some examples that some like help you brainstorm about what limitations you can talk about. If you look at the rubric, there's a rubric under assignment 6 that specifically tells you how many points each of the things that you need to have in there will have. There are 6 things that you need to talk about. Don't need to be super long or anything, but you want to say something about all these 6 things. Within and between subject design, I don't know if you've been over this in your lecture, some of you may already know, but it's very simple but very important in research. Between subject is when you compare different people to each other. For example, if I have the class and I tell this half of the class, exercise every day in the morning for an hour, and the other half don't exercise. And then after a week, I measure something, whether it's your mood or blood oxygen, doesn't matter, whatever it is. That's between subjects because people are doing 2 different things and we're comparing different people with each other. Within subject is what we did. We're comparing the time that it took you to do the neutral counting and the time with the time that it took you to do the congruent and incongruent and all of that. So with a class example within subject would be if I tell the whole class this week, exercise for an hour every day. And then when you do it all, I measure and then say next week, don't exercise. And I take your result and compare it to your result from the week that you exercised and the week that you didn't. That's within subject because I'm comparing things that same person did versus comparing things that different people did. So our study was within subject because we're not splitting the students and half do something different, half do something different. So we had a within subject. That can be a good thing or a bad thing. So here, in your opinion, could we say that that was a limitation, that it was within subject? Why not? What do you think? What can the possible problem be with within subject design? There's practice effect, like I kind of said before. Sometimes doing the first task can have an effect of doing on doing the second task, and so on. So could that be a problem? Why could it be a problem? Wouldn't counterbalance. Everybody did things in the same order, right? Fatigue. It doesn't have to do with like you being generally tired. It has to do with what the study causes, what the experiment task may cause. And especially this can be one problem within subject design, because the same person is doing all different things, especially if they're being done back to back. Order of presentation can be important, so that's why counterbalancing again is one way to fix that. Why the order can be a problem. We didn't switch the orders, but maybe if we do the neutral counting first, you would do better in neutral naming, or vice versa. Maybe not. So what do you think? So you want to talk about all those. How could they possibly have been limits? Also environment. So it was uncontrolled. You were sitting in your room. Nobody was observing. So you can say that some people may not be exactly doing what they're supposed to do. They may not be following the directions as they are supposed to. And there might be, because you were at home and it was online, you could maybe hear your dog barking or your roommate talking, and there might be a distractor, so the environment was not controlled. Can be a limitation. Setting usually refers to the way, so this was self-report. Everybody just put their own reaction time in there. So what can happen here? Not everybody's using the same timer, like stopwatch. Some may use a regular old school watch to time. Some may have a digital stopwatch. Those can all kind of mess with your outcome. So we want to talk about those two. Just some examples. So you do want to say something about all of these 6 things. So again, the conclusion section, where they kind of say what it is, but you want to restate this study, the purpose of this study. You want to restate your main findings and talk about the study implication. So again, the takeaway from the whole study goes in this conclusion paragraph. So you want a person to be able to read that paragraph and get a general idea of what the findings of this study were. So if this is a little checklist that if you look at all of these and decide that all of these have been done, then you should get full points. So hopefully you all will. So did you discuss each hypothesis and the result and tell the reader about the hypothesis, about incongruent condition, congruent condition, the neutral condition? Did you give your results meaning? So why do I think this happened? What are the underlying mechanisms, the rationale, all of that for the result that I'm reporting? So same thing, interference, facilitation, all those. So did I create meaningful connections between your results and others? So a little comparison between each of the 3 phenomena that we're talking about with some other old literature. These are just examples. It doesn't have to be these exact studies, but I thought it would be helpful. You want to make sure you talk about the limitation. So all the ones in the rubric that we just talked about, order and practice and fatigue, environment and setting, all that. And you want to make sure your conclusion or summary section is a nice wrap up of everything, and pretty much can give a good idea to the reader about the findings of the study, the purpose and the findings of the study. So for some possible questions you guys may have, you want to refer to these three that you talked about in your introduction. 2 of them would be fine as well, but 3 would be better. And you have to have 2 additional new references. So you want to sit and find 2 papers that you haven't talked about in this paper yet and add those. And the other ones that you had in your introduction, you can use, but you don't have to. So you are not going to lose points if you only have the highlighted ones. So if you find additional sources and they contradict your finding, or they find different things from you, actually it gives you a reason to talk about possible limitations they had or we had, or discuss why it might be and how we can actually design a new study that kind of can determine between the 2 that are conflicting which one is actually better or more true. So this is a little example here for you to how you can talk about it. Like there was this study that published when found contradicting results, and then you want to cite the authors and what they did, the mechanisms, how they investigated, what they found, and it's in contrast with our study, they find this, and maybe in future research we can do this or that to pick why which one is better and why they're different, and which one is more correct or more powerful, or whatever you want to call it. So your discussion is all in past tense because everything's already been done. You have your result. You did this, did that. You predicted, you found, and everything is in the past except for when you're talking about what can be done in the future. Obviously, that will not be in past tense. This is common sense. I'm sure all of you already know how to say this stuff. So for your final paper, we have a little while until you have to write that, but your final paper is going to be the same thing put together with the corrections made. So that's why it's taking me forever to give you back your introductions, because I'm trying to put in detail comments for wherever you lose points, why you lost point, and my suggestions for how to fix it. So if you take those seriously and look at the rubric and do everything I say, you shouldn't have much to do at the end. You just fix those parts, put everything together, and turn it in as your final paper. Do not plagiarize. It's going to be going in to Turnitin, and it's going to find if in the literature there's anything similar. It doesn't have to be the exact sentence. Even if you take a sentence and change 3 words in it, it's still going to find it. It's still not right. So you want to read something and put it completely in your own words. So we said that at first, but I'm going to just really quickly say it again. You don't want to use passive voice. Means, here are some examples. You want to say, we are going to watch a movie tonight, not a movie is going to be watched by us tonight. You want to say, I'll clean the house every Saturday, not the house will be cleaned by me every Saturday. These sound stupid, but when you're, some people think like it makes it sound sophisticated, but it doesn't. It just makes the paper harder to read, and the reader, it's harder for the reader to follow. So you want to try to use active voice, not passive. Two things you may see a lot when you read research studies and is important to know and good to use because they're cool is e.g. and i.e. e.g. literally means for example. So here's an example for it. And i.e. means that is. So if you say the mismatched stimuli, and then in parentheses you say i.e. incongruent condition, means that is incongruent condition. And then e.g. means for example. So really easy. Big difference between the two. And this is important for your quiz too. These are some of the things that I found in your introduction that some people didn't pay attention to. So I thought if I go over them quickly, maybe useful. So when you talk about the studies, those three especially, like if you look at the slides about introduction, it says that you have to talk in more details about the three Stroop, Hindman, and Wendes studies. Some people just like very briefly said something about it. That wouldn't get you full points. Lack of theoretical implication. So you want to like talk about your theoretical implication, what your study, why you're predicting what you're predicting. Some people didn't really have a rationale, and talk about the underlying mechanisms and stuff like that. It's not enough to just say the purpose of the study was to measure reaction time. It's a lot more than that. It's not really the purpose of the study to measure the reaction time. It's something else that we've talked about like a billion times. So you want to say participants, don't say subjects. The people. For animals, it's okay, but for humans, you're supposed to say participants. And if the paper has more than one author, which most of them do, you don't want to just put the name of one. We discussed that based on APA style, what you do if there's 1 to 3, if it's less than 5 or more than 5, you already know that stuff, but don't forget at all. Stroop is a name, so it has to be capitalized, not small s would be wrong. And everything you claim, you want to cite. When you do literature review, it's all past tense because it's all been done. No first names needed for authors. You don't need to say in the article the mechanisms behind blah, 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 blah. Name of the article is not needed. Don't say proof, already talked about. And remember that counting and reading conditions are different. Counting was when you counted the plus signs or counted the number of digits, but reading was when you had numbers and you were just reading the numbers. So do not use those interchangeably because they're different. And Stroop effect and Stroop task are obviously two different things. I said some people use them other way around. Why we say congruent and incongruent, what is it that makes it incongruent or congruent? Which is because the number of digits is different from the number itself. It's incongruent, and if they're the same, it's congruent. So everything that you use like acronyms for, you have to at first say the full word, and then after that you can use acronym. EG for FAU, TA, MRI, all that stuff. You only spell out numbers if it's in the beginning of the sentence or if they're not for numbers less than 10. Already talked about that before. The hypothesis should be complete, and if whenever it's not, I will make comments on your papers. In-text citation is a must. So you want the date and the authors of all the papers in text, in addition to your citation page. Do not plagiarize. So you're going to have assignment 6 due on the 29th. You have a while. There's actually another assignment 5 in 2 weeks. That's due on the 22nd, which is a quiz on methods, results, and abstract. But then after, the week after that, your discussion and citation page will be due on November 29th. So add 2 new sources. 2 to 3 pages. I can see for something like this, and considering the number of references, 3 pages would be a lot. So, but 2, if it's a little less, it's okay. It's more the quality than the quantity that I look at, but generally 2 to 3 pages. And need a reference page. We'll talk about it later next week. And so you want, on your citation page, you will have 7 sources altogether, because you had 5, and then you're adding 2 in your discussion. For each day that you turn in your assignment late, you lose 10 points. And when it's late enough to only give you 50 points, then we're not supposed to take them anymore. So try to start early so you can all turn them in on time. Next week, we will talk about the reference page and abstract. And then after that, you will have a quiz that we will talk about. And that's on the 22nd. All right. Stay safe, everyone, and thank you for your time today.